We just talked about ants, and now we're going to talk about the honeybee. Okay, so let's explore another group of insects in Hymenoptera that are almost as commonly seen on a warm summer day as the ant, honeybees. There are 20,000 different species of bee. That's so many. Most of them are solitary bees that live alone, but a few are social bees that live with thousands of others, sometimes up to 80,000 in one colony. Even though there are many different kinds of bees, I want to cover one type of bee in detail, the honeybee. It isn't native to America, but it was brought here from Europe, where it provided people with honey for thousands of years. The bumblebee is native to America, and I'll give this little forager an honorable mention at the end of the lesson. In this picture, this is the honeybee helping flowers to reproduce. Remember, they spread the pollen from one flower to another on their little fuzzy legs. It helps the plants pollinate. So bees are pollinators for flowers. Without them, we wouldn't have very much food because they wouldn't be able to produce the fruit without being pollinated. So in a flower, the male part of the flower produces the pollen, and the female part of the flower produces eggs. And in order for them to form a seed, the pollen must get from the male part of one flower to the female part of another flower. So how does the pollen get from one flower to another? Well, there's many ways, but we are talking about the bees transferring the pollen as they're on each flower. So they have hair-like bristles on its body, and those bristles get all covered with pollen while the bee is collecting both pollen and nectar for the hive. When the bee goes to another flower of the same kind, some of the pollen falls off and finds its way to the female part of the flower. Once that happens, seeds are formed and a big fruit, like an apple, peach, cherry, pear, or tomato, grows around the seeds to protect them, and then we can eat them. Bees are feared by most people because their ovipositors are stingers that are outfitted with an internal venom chamber for injecting venom into their victims. This is how bees protect their hive and themselves. Have you ever been stung by a bee? It hurts, right? That's because of the venom that they inject into you when they sting you. Honeybees have it a little more difficult than other stinging insects because their stingers have barbs on them. When a worker honeybee stings a creature, the barb causes the stinger to get caught. As the bee yanks to get its ovipositor out of the creature, the entire ovipositor and part of the abdomen come off of the bee. Sadly, this causes the little bee to die. Wasps, other kinds of bees, and queen honeybees don't have these barbs, and so they can sting again and again because they simply pull out the stinger. So if a honeybee stings you, it's going to die. Why does a honeybee have a barbed stinger if it kills the bee? Well, a honeybee sting hurts worse than a sting from most other insects, which is a powerful reminder to animals and people that they should avoid honeybees. The sting of a honeybee hurts so much because of the stinger is left in the skin of with the venom chamber attached. The sting of a honeybee, if you push on it, the more venom will go into your skin. In the same way, if you try to get the stinger out with tweezers, you will inject more venom into you. To safely remove a honeybee's stinger from your skin, you need to scrape the stinger from the side with a blunt object. This will pull the stinger out without squeezing the venom chamber. And remember, they have lots and lots of workers, so if you die, they're still able to function all together. All right, the royal food. Bees build hives out of a waxy substance that they make themselves. Not surprisingly, this substance is called what? Beeswax. A beehive is an elaborate, beautiful structure that contains hundreds of six-sided cells. Do you see the six sides there? The hexagon? Bees store food in most of the cells, but the queen also lays eggs in some of them.
Do you like it?
So just like a queen ant, a queen bee lays eggs. Let's see. So when they hatch, the larvae are fed by nurse bees, and if the bee is to be a worker, the nurse bees feed it a substance called the royal jelly for 3 days only. The royal jelly is a special white substance made by the worker bees. It has nutritional properties that make the bee develop and grow a lot in just 3 days. After 3 days, however, the nurse bees will change the larva's diet to pollen and honey to make sure it's a worker. The hive needs lots of workers. If a larva is fed royal jelly beyond 3 days, it will develop into a queen. Since a queen bee is bigger than a worker bee, the walls of the developing larva's cell must be broken down to give it more room to grow. So even after the queen bee is an adult, see if you can find the large bee near the center of this photo is the queen bee. And even after the queen bee is an adult, she is given a diet of royal jelly her entire life, which is usually about 5 years long. The queen bee is easy to spot because she's larger than the worker bees. Even though a hive can have only one queen, nurse bees still need to feed some larvae royal jelly. Those larvae do not survive, however, because the queen kills them before they mature. When the queen dies, however, there is nothing to kill the developing queen larvae, so they will continue to develop. When the first queen matures, she will kill the remaining larvae. This interesting process makes sure that the hive will never be without a queen for long, and that there will never be more than one queen at a time. Thomas did this. Here's the queen. She's bigger. Here's a worker, a bit smaller, and here's a drone. Now remember, both the workers and the queens are females. Well, what about the males? The male bees are called drones, and their sole purpose in life is to mate with the queen so that she can lay eggs. Since they can't do anything else, they don't live for very long. And before winter, they are all kicked out of the hive and not allowed back in. Since they don't know how to find food, they die, and it's really sad. Okay, worker bees. When a worker metamorphoses into an adult, a worker, if she is born early in the year, she will only live for about 5 or 6 weeks. If she is born in the fall, she will live through the winter, but die soon after spring arrives. Worker bees have a short but very busy, important life. Each worker bee begins with one job and graduates to the next job, much like a worker ant. Every job is just as important as the next, but they do get progressively harder as the bees move up the job ladder. Most female worker bees begin their lives as the nurse bees, feeding the young larvae and making the royal jelly for the queen. The next job is to be the storekeeper. Here we go. The storekeeper does 3 things. First, she makes sure the hive doesn't get too hot. As the temperature in the hive increases, she flaps her wings, which makes her like a little fan that cools the hive. Second, she packs the pollen brought in by gatherer bees into the cells of the hive so that it can be stored for future use. And third, she makes honey. After spending time as a storekeeper, the bees graduate to be a wax maker. This is a very hard job, much harder than feeding the bees and cooling the hive or even making the honey. The wax maker is an architect and builder of the hive, producing beeswax and forming the 6-sided cells of which the hive is made. When the wax makers are ready to add more structures to the hive, they gather into a group and hang, waiting for the wax to ooze out of them from glands in their abdomens. Remember the hive? Right there. Then with their back legs, they pull it out and shove it into their mouths, chewing it for a while, and this makes the waxy paste that becomes the hive. With the paste in its mouth, each bee is ready to spit it out, little by little, to create perfect 6-sided cells called hexagonal cells. After the bee has been a wax maker for a while, it will then be put to work at the entrance hive as a guard called a sentry bee. As a sentry, it protects the hive from intruders, including the drones that were kicked out of the hive, and if anything shouldn't be in the hive that tries to get in. The sentry uses its venomous stinger on the intruder. This kills the sentry, but it also keeps the intruder away. If a beehive has a rough time, like a really bad weather, bad winter, a severe lack of flowers, a catastrophe such as a visiting bear, the queen bee will send out robber bees. Robber bees will find and take honey from weaker hives so that their hive can still continue to survive. The last job that a worker bee has is usually that of a scout or a gatherer bee. Scouts go out each day searching for just the right flower. You see, most honeybees don't just visit the closest flowers. Instead, bees in a particular hive usually look for a specific kind of flower from which to gather nectar or pollen. The scout's job is to find that specific kind of flower. The gatherer bees are the ones that you usually see. They go to the flowers that the scouts have found and they gather pollen and nectar to bring it back to the hive. Okay, we're going to have to stop this video and you're going to have to watch another video next for dancing bees.